I'm in the slow learner group, so I want to make sure I hear everything correctly, that I replay it correctly. Number one, no state has done any of this because it is illegal for any state in the country to do any of this stuff until a time in the future. The time in the future is 2017. Ergo, no state has ever done it. Number two, if you get a 1332 waiver granted with the approval of these federal agency secretaries that you mentioned, in that 1332 waiver, it will delineate for the IRS and the rest of the world all of the agreements, and any deviations that were agreed to in that 1332 waiver, the IRS and anyone else would simply refer back to the 1332 waiver, and we would be clear, free and clear, based on that 1332 waiver, presuming whatever the IRS or anyone else was looking at was something that was in fact waived in the waiver. So you get it waived one time with a 1332, and then that applies throughout the rest of the federal system. Is that an accurate state of rephrasing?
The answer to your first question is yes, sir, you're correct. The answer to your second question is yes, the waiver, within the period of the waiver is a 5-year period, and you may apply to renew the waiver after the 5-year period. Whatever agreements are reached by the state and by the federal government within that 5-year period is governed by the terms of the waiver. Yes, sir. Briefly, with respect to the waiver process, the HHS secretary is the captain of the process, so that's the person we'll be dealing with primarily. Secretary Burwell will work with Secretary Liu to determine what the appropriate decision will be from the administration's perspective. The application has to address 6 points, so when you submit your application, you've got to have all 6 of these things in it. Obviously, what provisions of federal law, to the chairman's point, what provisions are you trying to waive? You got to specify those. Second, you've got to tell them how you're going to meet those requirements I mentioned earlier. It's affordability, comprehensiveness of coverage, and cost. You have to have an implementation timeline. How are you going to get this done? A budget plan that doesn't increase the deficit. Actuarial certifications and economic analysis, some kind of analysis that's done by the state. The state would have the ability to retain its own counsel in this regard that demonstrates the actuarial estimates that are used in determining the value of the plans, etc. And finally, you also need to determine how and if your waiver will impact other elements of the Affordable Care Act that are not being waived. So that the entire waiver process includes or is started with a waiver application that includes answers to these 6 questions. For a state to act, the application must be supported by a state law. There must be some piece of legislation that the state can point to. No, it doesn't have to be a new law. It can be an old law. There just has to be some state authorizing legislation to support the waiver application. HHS and Treasury are required to make a determination within 180 days or 6 months after the waiver is submitted. So this is quite a lengthy process. The agency is supposed to provide states with an initial read on the viability of the application within 45 days after it's submitted. Because no state submitted one yet, we don't really know what that 45-day thing looks like yet. So we'll have to see. But the law does say you've got to have some preliminary review take place within 45 days, and there is a federal public notice and comment period, in addition to whatever notice and comment period there would be here provided for by the laws of the state of Arkansas. There's a 5-year limit on the waiver that is renewable. We do have initial process regulations which are incorporated into this presentation. Those are final.